Welcome once again to The Lost Signals discusses games and gaming culture, a pretentious, philosophical, pedantic podcast where we focus on various aspects of video games as well as other issues and topics within gaming in general. Hello there, my children. Welcome to The Lost Signals discusses games and gaming culture. I am your surrogate father tonight, Scott Thurlow. I'm here with your crazy old Uncle Jonathan Ian Manzer.
I've had so many children and lost so many children.
Yes. And your absentee father, Stephen Amosi.
I've got to go pick up some cigarettes.
See ya never, Dad. Sure. So, given that, you might guess that we're going to be covering, we're going to call this dad games, but in all fairness, basically parental protagonist games. Games featuring a protagonist that is in a parental position, which is sort of central to the mechanics and or theme of a game. And we'll discuss, like, some of the ones that did that. And I would say it's more of a recent trend, but, what do you guys overall, like, first thoughts about these types of games?
Well, I would like to begin by differentiating between games that use families as a plot point.
Okay, as a device.
And those that explore a relationship.
That's fair. Okay.
Are you just handing it to me with that? I thought you were gonna do it. Okay.
What do you think about that, Steve-O?
So, yeah, I mean, there are games where it's like... So this is interesting. I was going to bring up Fallout in terms of this.
Sure, do it now.
But...
I think it applies to what you just said.
It's interesting. I think it can be looked at in both... Fallout 3, I think, is the big one. Really? Or 4? Fallout 4, yeah. Is the big one. But your relationship with your kid is just as... one point in the beginning and one point at the end, and the entire rest of the game is about you.
Yeah.
I would go so far as to say that these type of narratives can be cheap motivation and appeals at having an easy way of making pathos for a character.
So that's exactly. It's interesting. I was going to say something similar. So the way that it's done in 4, I think, is done with a much less deft hand than it's done in 3, despite the fact that you're the child figure in 3, right? I just want to bring this up really quickly.
Now go on.
The relationship that you have with your father in 3 is built throughout the game, even though your father is not there. Whereas
your father's in a different castle.
No real relation. Yeah, exactly. There is no real relationship you have with your son in Fallout 4. It's just kind of a plot device.
It's some fucking MacGuffin, more or less. And
which is why I like 3 a lot more than 4.
Sure, but I think that speaks to what E said. Like, that is I think a clear and at least a division that we can agree upon.
Yeah.
Where it's basically a plot device. It's not like the driving force, or it's supposed to be, but it often quickly falls away. So perhaps that's a good example for that side of the division. Go on.
I also was trying to think of games, old games, Nintendo era or Sega era games that have you as the parent figure, and none came to mind, and none are coming to mind initially, which goes with what you said about it being a new thing. That's not to say that those games don't exist, and as we always say, please prove me wrong, send this in.
Yeah, if you got some out there, ship it, but
I can't think of anything off the top of my head, and I was really going through it. I was going through all the standard games, and then even trying to think of ones that weren't quite so standard. I think probably the best chance you have with something like that is an old RPG. I just never played a ton of old RPGs back in the day.
Not for you. So let's put that on pause for a second, because I think we have some more things to address about that. Yeah. That's certainly a concern, or at least an issue that we can discuss. But I'm going to offer you an example then. If Fallout 3 and or 4 is sort of just the plot MacGuffin device aspect of it, using that relationship, but not exploring it, I guess I'll say, then something I would say Last of Us might be one where that the relationship is sort of central to the plot and everything else that's happening as well.
Right.
And I know we're going to say one, maybe we'll discuss more in a bit, but the new God of War certainly is that, to probably one of the best degrees we've seen.
I would say the best degree I've ever seen.
Sure.
I would say.
I don't think I can argue against that, and we'll say more about that. But
it's actually the best melding of narrative and gameplay. out there.
I would.
To reference an old
Yeah, no.
episode of this.
Our talks with Ari. I would like to hear his thoughts on this. Actually,
Yeah, we should ask
Ari, if you're listening.
Ari what he thinks. But no, I was just saying like that one comes to mind because it's recent and probably one of the best ones we've done. That have been done using that as a sort of hook and angle and as the core anchor point of the entire plot and game itself, even tying into mechanics and so forth. But I would say, like, perhaps to answer the question you raised just earlier, Steve-O, that the reason why here's my personal, perhaps, let's be clear, none of us are fathers or anything. None of us have kids here.
Yeah.
At least on this episode. So, I've seen this, like, this isn't like my, like, idea coming up with myself, but I think the answer might be something like, because that as developers got older, they themselves started having children, like, in their own personal lives, and thus were using that as a sort of input to develop games. And now that the general gaming audience is older, like, other friends we do have kids who are gamers, grew up, like, in our generation gaming, and now, like, perhaps that's become, like, a bigger issue in a sense, or, like, something that's happening in people's lives that speaks to them both as developers and to their audience who are becoming parents.
Mm-hmm.
Do you mind if I jump in on my
Go for it.
philosophical thing? Okay, so this is gonna. I'll try to start with two premises. And
Tell me a story, Dad.
Conclusion. Yes, thank you, my son. So I'm pointing to our picture of Freud up there. We did a episode somewhat recently, as far as somewhat recently goes, on Freud's look at how the structure of narrative and what the purpose of that is. And the thing is, like, when you're a kid, you play war games, and like because that's kind of a cultural. Sure. And then, like, traditionally, women play like the house sitting. This is kind of the traditional roles, and then we play act these given roles to us. Now I'm going to head into myth for a moment. A lot of times, narratives in myth serve not only an entertainment function, but a purpose. Right? So if you remember the Greek myth about Prometheus stealing fire from the gods,
right.
In that myth, it talks about how the fennel stalk is actually how he used to transport the fire. Again, it's instructive as well as entertaining in a way. So you're right, Scott, that as the audience grew older, these kind of games came into existence. And the reason such is not that I necessarily think that people are doing it for a cheap method or because of their experience.
No, I wasn't saying that per se, but
I'm just, or that just strictly, I have a kid now, I'm going to make games with kids in them.
Right.
It's in a sense, so like God of War, if you look at it, it's instructive on being a parent, specifically in like challenges that you'll face.
Sure.
And I think that I think they came about, and why they're more prominent now than they used to be, is because the games want to be taken seriously now, and they have serious themes that they want to explore, and part of that is by addressing cultural norms as it is, and part of that is that you're in your 30s now, you should be having a family soon. I'm going to have characters exploring issues of what
that entails
sacrifice and all of that involved with being an adult. And I think that, and being a parent, and I think that's why you see the games now, because it's representation. I'm just going to give a personal example quickly, and then I'll give it over to you. In Torment: Tides of Numenera, they had a thing where you can have a young girl join your
party,
and you become a parental figure to her. There's an option which you can either send her through a temporal portal,
which is the one I did.
Yeah, which she'll probably be well off there, but she's absent from the rest of the game.
Yeah.
If that happens, and I felt too much of a connection with her as a character, and I felt too looking out for her well-being, that I was willing to be selfish and keep her by my side because I felt it was the right thing to do. And I think that all these games really kind of hit those chords. So that's my rant.
That's a really interesting choice. And I remember when you were playing that game and you told me about that, and I was like, it's fascinating. It's like, either go through the portal and probably have a better life than you're going to have here fighting, whatever the hell we end up fighting with me, or stay by my side so I know where you are. And it's weird because, like, no one here is a parent, so I can't speak to that specifically, but like,
yeah, we don't have a direct line to that.
I don't know if I'm a parent.
I would
okay. I
would think that if I was a parent, that would be a very difficult choice, right? And I don't envy anyone who actually has to make a choice like that in real life, right? It's
Sure.
like that happens sometimes where parents actually have to make that choice of like, do I want my kid to probably have a better life, but maybe not? Or do I want to know and see what's going on with my kid? And I think that's a fascinating choice to have in a game. There's similar moments in God of War, although you don't have the real choice in that game of what
not in the same way,
goes through
but sure.
and what your kid experiences. But like, there are these moments where there are just, oh, this is going to be a parental teaching moment in this game, and you kind of get this feel for like what the writers perhaps have gone through, or like at least ideas of what they would do if they were parents. And I think that's kind of interesting in its own right, that you don't have the choice, right? It's like, well, if given this situation, here's the choice that this writer would make, at least in terms of like
how it unfolds,
knowing how a kid would act and like knowing how they would act or knowing how Kratos would act as a parent. And I think that's also a really cool look at how these kind of relationships work through games. There are a couple other games that I know we're going to mention. I'm going to pass it off, though, because I've been talking for a little while now.
No, all good. So, yeah, I'll tell my personal story. Like, Torment Tides of Numenera was, by the way, if you didn't catch our episode, both on Ian and my Games of the Year last year. And while we were playing, he told me that story that he encountered this companion character who was essentially a little girl. She's almost useless in terms of the game. Like, she can't do much. She doesn't have many abilities. She's basically like a mule at best. Like,
yeah, at the beginning.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. When you first encounter her. But that's what I'm saying. Like, it's sort
I'm
of
defending her.
It's. I know you are, but I'm saying like
that's my daughter.
It was an interesting narrative and like sort of emotional choice, but also mechanically. Here's my side of it. What I did with Rin in that game was that so I found her as a companion, and I took a look. I'm like, oh, you have like nothing. Like you don't have much. Like you're kind of like a dead weight on me. So I sold her back to the slavers or whatever they were. But then I felt bad about it. So then I came back, like, accidentally, like, this is like some convoluted thing in the sense that you can do because it's an Exile game, they have this kind of shit. When she was gone out of my party, I picked up another companion who was basically like the roguish, like, charmer, like, he was like the ladies' man, essentially. Yeah. And I took him back, like, I just wanted to see what happened. Like, I was going back to where the slavers were for some other reason, some other quest. And with him in my party, I went back there, and like the slaver leader, who was like a woman, like he made her a deal to like basically like have sex with her to get the little girl back. And I was like, yeah, Jesus. That's fucking like amazing that I had that. So yeah, I'm gonna do that now. So I got her back, but then I shipped her through the temporal doorway to have like a better life, and also to get her off my fucking party so I can have my shit. But I'm just saying all that to say, like, it's interesting that like how it can like sort of affect you depending who you are. And like you said, none of us are parents per se, so that was just little side quests that we are aware of. None of us are dealing with children we know that we sired, I suppose we'll say. But all I'm saying is like it's an interesting little thing. So I mentioned Last of Us. That was one of like probably the early ones, like maybe the early wave of like parental type games. Mm-hmm. The thing is, I had my issues with that game, like the way they set up the narrative and like why the main character Joel was supposed to and ended up being parental towards Ellie. But I understood it at the time, but I just felt it was handled a little poorly. But nevertheless, like, yeah, because she's with you, like a la Kratos and Atreus, like the whole time, like it sort of does foster a relationship, even though there's like fictional digital things that don't exist. But when written and performed well, I think you can get something out of it, and like, yeah, have a connection and sort of maybe have a sense of what it might be like to be a parent, and as you said, Steve-O, to make some difficult choices, which, sure, like, aren't real-life choices, but nevertheless maybe make you think about this stuff more than you normally would have.
Clementine in Walking Dead.
Yep, good one.
Also a very tragic story. Again, none of my relationships with kids ends well, unfortunately.
Yeah, well, as
I try my best.
audiences might know, I'm not fond of children in real life, which is why I don't have any. And even when they are around, I feel vaguely uncomfortable, only because, like, I can't. They're little psychopaths running around. You can't converse with them. Like, you can't have a discussion such as this with them. So therefore, I'm at a loss of what to do or say. But nevertheless, like, we do know people again who are parents who may have, like, obviously will have a different perspective upon it. And
I should hope so.
And going to, like, what I was going to say is that yes, thank you, my friend. What I was going to say is that then may be affected in a different way and see something different when playing games that do contain protagonists that are parental in nature.
I was actually going to ask a question kind of similar to that. Is,
Okay.
You know, how do you think these games affect you differently when you have kids versus like when you don't have kids?
I mean, again, it's only hypothetical because you can't say until you are on both
Right.
sides, right? But I mean, like, surely it must be somewhat different. Like, I'll say this. I'll tell you like a quick story, not involving me. There's another game, ties into a game I was going to bring up though. If you haven't heard of it, a couple years ago, I want to say like 2015 or so, something like that, recent years, a game came out called That Dragon Cancer, which was about parents losing their child to cancer, made by two parents who, that's what happened to them in real life.
Yeah.
So I sort of, as a way to cope with it and deal with their grief, they made a game about it and detailing like that journey, like in very like unflinching detail, as far as I understand. I haven't played it, but I do know a number of words and was recognized sort of because of that, in light of that.
Right.
So like, I mean, the thing is, if it can evoke something of a paternal instinct, even though you're not like a parent yourself, then perhaps that's like the way it could be. But you know what I mean? Like, you'll never know for sure. I just feel like it's possibly, like you said, it's sort of like maybe a Freudian thing where it's preparing, like it's meant to like teach you something about it if you were considering being a parent or
Right.
are like a newly.
I don't know if it would have as much of a impact if you already had kids.
You've already dealt with this bullshit.
Yeah, but it could be cathartic perhaps.
But-
Again,
I learned a couple things.
But yeah, like, well, playing God of War, just dealing with there. All right, so without
some spoilers, yeah.
giving away too much about the game,
light little spoilers.
there's a portion of the game where your son is just an asshole, and it's done
Yeah.
in the way of like how I assume I was when I was like a
Right,
12-year-old.
I remember
like,
being a
and
13-year-old
still to this
dickhead.
day.
such a little piece of shit.
Yeah, sure.
Like, there's a point where I just like, because I knew I couldn't punch him, tried to punch my child in
All right.
God of War.
Well, you're clearly not qualified to be a father in real life.
Well, I would punch a pillow in real life.
Okay.
You know,
But no.
I swung an axe at him once or twice,
exactly.
which is why.
Did you try to throw the axe at him?
I tried. Like,
All right.
I was trying to do a little puzzle,
Let's not dwell on
and
it. but-
all he did was go,
Yeah, I remember. Sure. So, man, so there's, like, I think that's all valid. Like, again, unfortunately, we're not, or scratch that, we're just not qualified to say, like, the other side of the fence when having kids, like, how true or not it is to real life, I suppose, and, like, what emotions it evokes and so forth. But the story I was going to tell is that I read a review of That Dragon Cancer back in the day, written by a woman who was a mother of two younger girls. I think they're, doesn't matter, like 6 and 8 or whatever. But she said, after I played this game, in her review, she like, I played this game and I called my two daughters out of school, like feigning some emergency, but just because I wanted to be with them, because that's what this game like affected in me.
Yeah,
It's like,
I mean,
that's kind of a powerful thing.
those types of stories are really interesting, and I wish that my mom had pulled me out of school.
When she
to talk
played
about a
a
video
game,
game.
no, not to talk about them, because it evoked in
whatever.
her such an instinct that,
to bring me to the movies or whatever. I don't give a shit.
okay,
I
but
just didn't want to be in school.
I know perhaps you're missing the point here, but
I don't know what the point is. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. No,
Sure.
that's a really interesting story. Like, I think that's a really cool
same.
thing that evoked that strong of an emotion. That a video game can evoke that strong of an emotion,
and a person who was in fact a parent in real life.
and kind of goes back to my point that I brought up a few times throughout the length of this show, where I think that people who think that video games are not art are full of shit and don't understand what video games are.
Sure.
I have an interesting follow-up to your question about how parents would view this. How do you think 18-year-olds or 16-year-olds or whatever the younger crowds would look at Atreus? And
well, that's what I was going to say. I think that they, and also, well, at this point, I probably identify more with Kratos, right? Even though I'm not a father, but like, if you're,
you are a god of war.
If you,
so
that's true.
You got a sweet beard, just like him. Go on.
To dye my face super white and have a little whatever. I think
Get your battle.
I think that they would probably identify more with Atreus because they're closer to that, right? Like more than the father, because they are not even to the point where they're thinking about becoming a father. Most of them,
sure.
You know, so I think that would be interesting to ask like a teenager what they think of the game and like how they identify with these characters, who they identify more with, like what they think. But you know what? To be honest, I think they would probably think the same thing because this game is specifically trying to get certain emotions out of you, and one of them is my son is such a fucking annoying asshole right now. Like, you know,
at that portion,
it doesn't matter who you are. At some point when you're playing the game, you're like, oh, now I get why I was such an asshole when I was doing that same stuff to my parents. Yeah. You know,
get it.
I don't necessarily know if people have that much self-reflection until later on. Like,
it's interesting.
I don't know. It'd be an interesting question to ask. Yeah, you're right.
For sure. I mean, again, like we can take a survey, like, hey, any 16 to 21-year-olds out there like playing God of War? Like,
I'm sure a ton of them are playing the game. You know, like,
but yeah, like you're right. Like it's because it's a weird like at that point in your life, you're weird like in between. You're not quite Atreus, but you're certainly not Kratos in terms of that either. But yeah, like I mean, the game. I think the game might be like we're going to talk more about God of War certainly. So I don't want to say too much more about it, but I do want to give it the praise it deserves, which is a lot. That perhaps does such a good job that maybe it will even allow people who aren't quite normally wouldn't be within that mindset to experience that in a sense. So perhaps that's more accolades for it. But no, I think there was one other game that we wanted to bring up. It's called What Remains of Edith Finch, which was also on a Game of the Year last year. So before I go on, the caveat is that you're not the parent in this game. You're in fact like the pregnant 16 or 17-year-old girl who's going through like the house of Edith, or her Finch ancestral house. But it almost, at least for us, it made us feel kind of paternal once that was sort of revealed.
I didn't know it till the end.
Yeah, like it's very subtle, and
I didn't recognize it till the end either. But you can, at any point in the game, you can look down and notice that like that you're pregnant.
It's such a good touch that we didn't realize that until it's like somebody else pointed it out to us afterwards. Chris's wife Beth, in fact. But yeah, like then I played through it again and noticed that, and I was like, wow. Totally right. Like it's kind of obvious there from the beginning, but still, gone.
I would say this game's really interesting because you get this paternal feeling for all of the members of the family at some point.
Yeah, that's a good point. All
their stories, paternal or maternal, depending on who you are, I guess. But like,
or just parental.
Yeah, and at the end of the game, when you find out that you've been pregnant this entire time, it takes on a whole different feel to you. I'm sorry if we're ruining this for anybody because it's a great reveal, but like,
sorry, it's been a while.
Don't listen to our shit if you if you don't want spoilers.
Still play it anyways, but now that you have listened and heard that, go on.
But I think it's a great reveal, and I think it did make me change. It changed the way that I felt about the entire rest of the game that I already played.
Exactly.
Through.
But that's actually a third type. It's not a trivial plot point to move, but I also didn't have the impact of it going through knowing this.
Yeah.
It's more of an interesting retrospect over the meaning of the entire work, which was powerful, but I don't know if it has the point of, like, you're not dealing with any of the repercussions.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
Or the whole plot is the repercussions of it.
Right.
But that's all in hindsight. I don't know. I don't know if that counts.
But like
it's sort of like a third gray area, as you were saying.
I'll say this: having that reveal, the reason that it changed the way that I looked about everything else is because I was kind of just going through the game at that point. It's a fairly short game, but like as soon as that happened, I went back. Like every time I look back at all those characters that I learned their stories to, I felt like they're parents who were like losing a child.
Sure.
For all of them, like I felt like one of the first stories is the grandfather, I think, who came over with his family, and like I felt like I was I felt like I was really like looking at the story, his story. As soon as that reveal happened, I felt like that whole story was his story, looking at his whole family just falling apart and like I felt like a more of a relationship to all those characters as soon as that happened, which is a really weird trick that they pulled. This one weird trick.
Sure. But, stop it. But, I mean, again, I guess we mentioned spoilers for Edith Finch, that if you guys recall, there's another episode in which you're from the perspective of a very young, like a 1-year-old, 2-year-old almost, who accidentally drowned in the tub.
Yeah.
And that was like one of the, like,
right.
If you remember that. Right, so like,
I repressed that one.
Right, so like that is in the game. So like that's certainly from the perspective of the mother of that character at the time.
Yeah,
in which that happened to, like, that was the story of the tragic death of that member of the family. So yeah. So there's that too.
Ian just got devastated all over again.
So I'm sorry, my friend, but I'm just saying that was contained in there. So it almost has both. Yeah. But you're right. Like the main character being Edith Finch, you don't really know that. I mean, we didn't get it out of that until retrospect, but it does change your perception of what happened and how it relates to the stories that you did go through during the plot of the game.
Yeah, and one of the few games that is actually from the mother's perspective, if you want to put it that way.
Yeah, that's true.
Even though I just made a point for the grandfather, but like, but yeah, like, you know, it is a lot of these games you'll see from like you're a father figure, right? And like I like that you are the mother figure in this, and
yeah, that's probably like
the whole epilogue is amazing, like her whole letter to her son.
That's probably like an unfortunate problem unto itself, is that even within this, like, you see the father figures more often than mother figures as active protagonists, but perhaps it's probably its own episode because that's just the sexism of the world, right. not specifically to video games. But I have one more. It is a father thing, but it's from Observer, in which the framework is, it was dystopian future, sort of like cyberpunky, Blade Runner-ish, but you are an older, like, detective who gets a signal, more or less, from your long-lost son, and that kicks off the plot. And the plot is to, like, sort of have a redeeming encounter with your son, or not, depending how you choose to do it. But I thought, like, that was a recent one that indeed, like, that was the focal point of the plot. Like, a lot of the stuff is ancillary to it. You're a detective, like, yeah, but you're basically tracking down clues to find out what happened to your son who disappeared, like, 10 years ago or 15 years ago, whatever it was. So that's another good recent one. We
get father signal.
Yeah, exactly. Father signal turn on, more or less, or son signal even. But yeah, so like we just said, it is kind of cool to me. Like, again, even though we are not parents unto ourselves, that this sort of seems to be a bit of a trend. Or like you see more characters fit into the written and develop for this situation. I think it is indicative, in a sense, of how games are maturing and how they're being taken more seriously, or at least attempting to be. And I think often achieving the fact that they're trying to comment upon more, like, relevant life social issues than they would have beforehand or previous to this, like, let's say, generation or so.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I don't have much more to say about these games. I think I said pretty much what I wanted to.
Yeah, I think I'm trying to think of anything that's coming out, like, soon that's going to be in this vein. Nothing I think of offhand, unless we call Red Dead 2 it. But probably not.
Like a good child, it should be a surprise.
Yeah. Okay, I guess we'll end with that. Sure. But again, if you guys got anything out there that type protagonists who are in parental positions that were good, ship it to us and check it out.
Yeah.
But other than that, I of course am going to remain childless, Scott Thurlow, and I've been here with Jonathan Ian Manzer.
I love all my digital children.
And Stephen Amosi.
And I'm going to go listen to Father and Son.
All right. And we'll see you next time. Good night. Thank you for joining the Lost Signals Games and Gaming Culture. Check us out on YouTube and iTunes for the shows and more, and on Facebook and Twitter for updates.